Thea is the daughter of the king, and thus she's entitled to the safety of a castle, to an arranged marriage with a suitable nobleman, to elegant gowns with beaded sleeves that hang on her wrists like shackles. She need not concern herself when the castle guard catch a lake demon, but she does concern herself, visiting the part fish, part bird, part reptile creature every day in the dungeons. She starts to see herself in the demon's wild, shrieking efforts to escape his cage. At the same time, she finds herself increasingly fascinated by the lake surrounding the castle, standing on the walls for hours as she dreams of escape. The day comes that the castle guard must kill the captive lake demon. Thea finds herself presented with the choice to resign herself to the life of a princess or to turn her daydreams into reality. The lake was still black-blue, the horizon beyond still a thin black stripe, and still she felt an urge to jump. She felt tied to the castle wall, as if the hem of her dress had mingled with the stone, trapping her where she stood. She stayed away, looking out across the lake and wondering about the kingdom on the other side. She dropped her gaze to the water below and considered just how cold it might be. Summer was not so far off, but a chill did still linger in the early mornings. That was why she was still wearing her thicker winter dresses, the ones that were heavy with layers and embellishments that weighed on her when she walked and forced her to hold her shoulders in a way that made them ache. That morning, the dress she wore felt even heavier than usual. She played with the sleeve, which was thick with blue beading, like little drops of water or scales. And she imagined taking the dress off, loosing the ties in the back, sliding her shoulders out, letting it drop to the stone at her feet. But the daydream didn't stop there. It continued, so that after shedding the dress, she was stepping to the side, and then closer to the edge of the wall, and then sailing over the wall, floating into the air, as if flying for a moment before plunging into the water below with barely a ripple. She liked that daydream, even though the water looked cold and unfriendly, and so she stayed on the wall for longer than ever before, until the sun was low in the sky, ready to set. It was that, the setting sun reflecting off the lake like fire, that brought her back to the present and made her leave the wall. She passed the ground floor on her way down the steps and then descended another level past the kitchens and still another and another until the air grew cool and the stone walls slick and damp. She told herself that she was going to go for one last look, but with each level she passed on her way to the dungeons, she wondered if she wasn't going for another purpose. The cold air caught in her lungs when she reached the bottom of the stairs, reminding her of how it feels to be underwater when the last bit of breath runs out. It won't matter either way, she told herself sternly. It won't matter whether it's given up, if it's going to be killed either way. But the silence, the absence of frantic shrieks and teeth on bars cut through her like ice water. She gulped down a breath, told herself again that it didn't matter, and stepped inside. There was an explosion of sound, even before she could orient herself, before her eyes could adjust to the dim torchlight. It was the familiar shrieking and clattering and flapping of wings, and once her eyes adjusted, she saw the creature in the same place, behind the same bars. She breathed out in relief. The lake demon was thinner than before, limbs bony, muzzle sharp and angular, making it look even more unnatural than it already did. There were pale scars and scabs across its body, perhaps from rubbing and flailing against the bars. There was a change to his eyes as well, although it wasn't the glassy, dull stare Thea had feared seeing. The defiance was still there, as hot as ever, as it locked eyes with her and chewed on the bars. But there was defeat mixed in as well. It was the look of someone who continues to fight, not because of hope, but because of hate. It opened its mouth wide and cried, flapping its wings and thrashing its tail. Thea drew closer, not bothering to walk around the damp spots on the floor or the dripping stones in the ceiling. She drew closer than she ever had, close enough to see the demon's black pupil dilated with rage, close enough to see the individual scales spilling across its face like a flow of water. A daydream came to her, sharp and clear, despite the distraction of the shrieks and cries. She saw herself reaching for the lock, unfastening the chain and opening the door. She saw the creature giving one last cry, one last thrash of its tail, before sailing through the door, flying across the room and up the stairwell. She saw herself running after, clumsy in her heavy dress, tripping over the hem. She saw herself frantically unflying, untying the ties, stepping out of the dress, and flying up the last of the stairs, reaching the castle wall just in time to see a black dot disappearing into the horizon as the demon escaped. Her hands began to shake as she realized they were moving for the chain. The lake demon fell silent, watching her with shrewd, beady eyes, as if it were just as surprised, as if wanting to see what she could do next. What if it doesn't go the way I saw, she thought, resting shaking fingers on the lock. What if it doesn't fly straight out? She looked at the teeth, at the claws, at the ripping muscles under the scales, at the small, hateful eyes. It could rip me apart if it wanted to. She thought of the guard on the day they caught it. Look how it would devour everything. Then let it, she thought, suddenly with the same fierce hate she saw in the eyes of the thing. Let it end now, when I still feel alive. Let it just end now, instead of 20, 40, 60 years from now, when my eyes go dull and glassy. The lock was cold and slick from the damp, but after a few tries, Thea was able to unfasten it. The lake demon stayed silent the entire time, watching her as if fascinated. Her hands shook as she undid the latch to the cage, and her heart was pounding so fast she thought it might burst as she swung open the door. There was a split second where the demon and her were both still, eyes on each other instead of the open door of the cage. Then, with a shriek, it flew out, past her and out the door of the dungeon. Thea followed, tripping and stumbling on her dress, just like she'd foreseen. The cries of the lake demon echoed around her as she followed, floating down and echoing in the small space of the stairwell so that it sounded like she was following an entire flock of them. She made it up one level before ripping off her slippers, which were sliding on the stone, making it impossible for her to get traction. She climbed 2 more levels after that before she reached behind her to untie the ties of her dress, still running as she did. After another level, she got it unfastened. She shrugged the weight off her shoulders, slipped out of the beaded fabric, and continued up the stairs. The air was cool but soft against her skin as she stepped off the last step onto the wall. The lake demon was not yet a black dot on the horizon. She had run fast enough. She had caught up to him, almost. He was still close enough that she could see the outline of his tail, writhing as if through water, and she could hear the rushing wind with each stroke of his wings. But with every second, he drew further away, and she realized with a shock of despair that it was over. She'd never see it again, might not see another one as long as she lived. The despair grew as the lake demon shrunk to nothing more than a silhouette against the blue sky, then a dot, and then it was impossible to see it all. Thea's eyes dropped to the lake, to the dark water below. She saw herself plunging in again, just like she'd seen so many times before in her mind's eye. Only then she had simply sailed over the edge in something that was half flying, half jumping. But now, with the wall's edge before her, the stone reaching up to her now bare waist, she wasn't sure she'd be able to do it like that. She brought her hands forward, let them rest lightly on the edge for a moment that was less hesitation than savoring the feel of the stone on her hands, the air on her skin. Then in a swift movement, she heaved herself up, the stone cold against her hands, her legs, her stomach, as she scrambled up. She looked long at the horizon before she jumped. The lake demon was gone, but the thin black line of land beyond, of the kingdom across the water, was still there, more solid and immovable than the water that had lapped at the stones below her. She jumped, hands streamlined in front of her in a dive. As she soared down to the water below, she imagined it felt a bit like flying, perhaps a fraction of what the lake demon must have felt as it moved through the air, no ground under its feet. She was vaguely aware of hearing shouts as she fell and realized, as if remembering another lifetime, that the guards must have seen her jump. The cries went silent as she plunged into the water. She felt a split second of panic as she wondered whether she'd remember how to swim. But it may have just been the shock of the cold, because her feet started kicking before she realized she told them to. She swam for yards before finally coming up for air. The sudden explosion of sound, of alarmed shouts and whistles as her head emerged, felt like as much of a shock as the cold water had been. She looked behind her quickly to see the guards clustered at the wall, waving their arms and their spears. Then she faced forward towards the thin black line across the lake. They'll come after me, she realized. They'll swim after me, but I'm here, I'm there, and they'll have to swim with tunics weighing them down. I can't let them catch me, she thought. She took a deep breath and plunged back down into the water.